In 1820, scientific explorer Stephen H. Long coined the term the Great American Desert for the lands west of the Missouri River. Starting in the early 1800s, fur trappers and explorers would follow the foot and horse paths created by Native Americans over thousands of years, turning them into trails that hundreds of thousands of pioneers would use to make the dangerous trek from the United States to present-day Utah, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California. In the 1840s, as the trails were still being defined, the average time to make the trip west was 151.7 days. And for the most part, each day was a repeat of the previous day. While there were times of excitement, fear, and danger, most of the days were marked by a common routine that repeated over and over, a daily grind. The day began around 4 a.m. with a wake-up call, usually a report from a rifle or a shotgun, or maybe the mournful sounds of an old bugle. One of the first tasks was to round up the livestock. This was the job of the drovers, who would scour the landscape for any cows, oxen, or sheep that had wandered from the camp. The teamsters would then yoke the oxen or tack up mules if they were used. This could be a challenging task, depending on the mood of the animals. And with heavier wagons, it could be a time-consuming process since it usually involved anywhere from 6 to 10 animals. While the drovers and teamsters were taking care of the livestock, the women and children would prepare the breakfast for the day. Sometimes this would involve gathering firewood or buffalo chips for cooking. A typical breakfast would often consist of Johnny cakes and bacon with fresh milk and butter from the cows. After breakfast, one or more of the scouts would ride ahead of the wagon train to survey the terrain and situation ahead of the party, looking for water, the best route to take, and any signs of trouble. They would then ride back to the wagon train to report their findings and then head out again. In the early migrations, these scouts would be directed and sometimes accompanied by fur trappers and traders who had signed on to guide the wagon trains across the plains, deserts, and mountains. Men like James Clyman, Joseph Walker, Solomon Sublette, Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick, Caleb Old Greenwood, and Isaac Hitchcock. These men also played an important role in negotiating with the various Native American tribes whose lands the pioneers would pass through. After all the livestock was gathered, breakfast served, and wagons loaded, the leader would then organize the wagons into groups. These groups would determine the order of departure, which usually changed on a daily basis. That way you weren't always eating the dust of the wagons ahead. The leader was a critical role. This was normally a person elected by the party, which was often a contentious process. The choice of leader was critical. Choose a poor leader like John Bartleson of the Bidwell-Bartleson Party of 1841, and you were faced with chaos, dissension, and peril. Choose a strong leader like Elijah Stevens of the Stevens-Townsend-Murphy Party of 1844, and you would go on to make history as the first party to bring wagons into California over the Sierra Nevada. On the trail, the monotony set in. The wagons were for carrying food, tools, and other supplies. Your day was marked by walking, miles of walking through grassy plains, hot deserts, rugged mountains. In blazing heat, torrential rain, or snow, you were plagued by dust, mosquitoes, scorpions, and snakes. And when Mother Nature called, privacy was rarely a thing you could count on. And then there were river crossings. Endless river crossings. Sometimes the rivers were shallow enough to simply ford. Other times you had to convert your wagons into boats using cow or buffalo hides and float them across, swimming alongside with your livestock. It seems the rivers were never ending. Around midday, the pioneers would stop to noon it, or for lunch as we call it today. Here they would recruit their livestock, giving them water and letting them graze on the grasses if available. The pioneers' meal usually consisted of something simple: jerked beef or buffalo if they had it, maybe some leftover Johnny cakes from breakfast, or even hardtack or biscuits if times got tough. Rarely did they stop to prepare a meal during this rest break. After lunch, the slow trek west would continue. Hunting parties would be dispatched to look for buffalo, antelope, deer, rabbits, whatever food source might be available on the plains. Children would have their chores to complete, gathering firewood or buffalo chips along the way, looking for prairie onions, camas roots, or garlic, anything that might add a little flavor to supper. Boys would count the rotation of the wagon wheels to keep track of the distance traveled and help tend to the livestock. Girls would help their mothers tend to the little ones. Everybody pitched in, regardless of age. If the daily goal of 15 to 20 miles had been reached, the wagon train would halt around 5 p.m. If not, the journey would continue. At day's end, the wagons would be circled for protection and to form a corral for the livestock. Each person would perform their assigned duties, preparing meals, tending the livestock, gathering wood. Supper would be served, hopefully from the day's successful hunting and gathering of herbs and spices. Clothes would be mended, wagons repaired, rifles cleaned. Maybe some clothes would be washed, and if there was a river or stream nearby, maybe even a bath for the weary travelers. The leader or captain would then plan the next day's travel, choosing the routes, assigning tasks, and handling any issues or disputes that may have arisen. And finally, after all the tasks were completed, a little time to relax, stories to be told, Bibles read, a little playtime for the children. Hopefully some laughter and maybe even a tune or two from an old fiddle. And then off to bed around 9 o'clock. Not a nice feather bed, just a blanket on the ground or under the wagon. And then at 4 a.m. the next morning, the daily grind begins again. Just another of the 151.7 days on the trail. A routine that would be repeated by over 250,000 immigrants who would head west searching for a new life.